Hello YouTube, it's RJ the West here. Welcome back to another episode of my Warframe story. We're gonna pick up where we left off. So if you guys remember in the last episode, Samantha and Reggie were captured in the gas city by Alad V. And Alad V basically had Samantha's Mesa put in his personal bed chambers while using Reggie's Site 9 as target practice. James and Wendy were able to successfully rift jump into the gas city and smuggle them out. Well, free them. The only thing they had to do now is get Samantha's Mesa. Samantha tells James that Aladvi's personal bedchamber is surrounded by nullifier pillars and explains to James that it may not be possible to enter his chamber while in the rift plane. James said to Samantha that he altered the frequencies of Limbo's rift to be able to circumvent material plane nullifier technology, making them useless against the rift. Reggie is now back in his Site 9 and is in position. Wendy begins to follow him and back him up. Samantha pulled back slightly, her analytical mind tactical overdrive as she grabbed James' armored arms. James, we have a critical structural obstacle. Alad V's personal bedchamber isn't just guarded, it is completely surrounded by high output nullifier pillars. They form a localized, overlapping dampening grid. It is mechanically impossible to enter or maintain the rift plane inside that perimeter. James's top-hatted helmet tilted, a low, confident hum vibrating through his frame. Inside his somatic pod, a brilliant smile broke across his face. Alad V's data models are obsolete, James replied, his voice completely steady now. The static in his mind replaced by the cold, mathematical certainty. He calculated his nullifier tech based on standard material plane physics. But during my time away from you, I finalized the higher dimension proofs. I can manually alter the harmonic frequencies of Limbo's rift plane by shifting our spatial displacement wavelength into a non-Euclidean variance. We can completely circumvent their dampening grid. His nullifier pillars would be utterly useless against us. Samantha stared at him, her eyes wide with awe. He hadn't just coped with their separation. His hyperfocus had allowed him to master the very thing that destroyed the original Limbo. You actually solved the dimensional jump equation, he whispered. I had to, James said softly. I needed a way back to you. Sorry, guys. Before the weight of his words could fully settle, a crisp, synchronized chime echoed over the private neural channel. This is Site 9. I am fully synchronized and in position. Reggie's voice boomed, completely devoid of his previous physical pain. Back inside his precision calculating sharpshooter frame, his analytical focus was absolute. He had taken up a high altitude perch on a crane overlapping the eastern hangar bay, his long range rifle humming with lethal energy. Perimeter locked down. Any Corpus reinforcement crossing will be any Corpus reinforcements crossing the main bridge will be liquidated. I am up. I am right behind him, backing him up. Wendy's voice chirped in, her wisp frame floating seamlessly in the shadows right next to Reggie's sniper perch. She began deploying a dense network of glowing reservoirs, ready to flood Reggie with speed and electrical surges the moment the alarm inevitably raised. The escape route is primed. Jimmy, go get that frame. James James turned back to Samantha, holding out his hand just as he had done with Wendy on the launch deck. Take my hand, Samantha, James commanded gently. I am going to wrap the rift around us, shift our frequency, and walk us straight through the Lad V's front door. Samantha smiled, placing her hand firmly into his. Lead the way, calculator. With a sudden, violent snap of Limbo's fingers, a blinding, non-Euclidean golden aurora enveloped them both, completely phasing them out of the material plane as they marched directly toward Aladvi's heavily fortified inner sanctum. Alright, guys, this is where things are going to get interesting. When James and Samantha finally entered um, Alad V's bedchamber. Oops. Their Uh, let's see. When James and Bunny entered, they immediately noticed that Samantha's Mesa was lying in his bed. This disturbed Samantha and angered James. As Samantha was getting her Warframe out off the bed, Zan Zan what the hell is it called again? Zanuka? It's a robot dog thing that Alad V had. Zanuka pounced on Samantha, pinning her on the bed. And James opened opened a cataclysm. Ugh. Samantha was getting close as well off the bed. Zanuka pounced on Samantha, pinning her to the bed, and James freezing time. Samantha was able to break from Zanuka's clutches and let's see. Let's see, and was able to reconnect to Mesa. Her Mesa. Alright, here we go. The heavy gilded doors of Alad V's personal quarters didn't even register their presence. Shifting their spatial wavelength into a non-Euclidean variance worked flawlessly. James and Samantha walked directly through the overlapping violet fields of the Velfire plains. Pillars. I meant to say pillars. The corporate technology hummed violently, but the dampening waves slid right through the rewritten code of Limbo's rift without disrupting a single calculation. They materialized inside the luxurious, dimly lit room. The opulent gold and silk decor vanished from their notice the instant they looked at the center of the chamber. Samantha's Mesa was lying flat across Elad V's bed. A profound wave of revulsion and disturbance washed over Samantha. To an operator, a warframe wasn't just armor. It was an extension of their very soul, their physical identity in the origin system. Seeing it displayed there like that was deeply invasive violation. Beside her, James's high IQ mind completely short-circuited into pure, unadulterated rage. The static in his head roared. The mathematical perfection he always maintained fractured under a protective instinct so violent it routed his somatic pod. "Secure your frame immediately," James hissed, his voice trembling with dangerous intensity. Samantha rushed forward, her physical hands gripping Mesa's cold metallic shoulders to drag the frame off the silk sheets, but Alad V had left the security protocol behind. With a mechanical screech, a sleek quadrupedal hunter proxy dropped from the shadows from the high ceiling. It was Zanuka. The twisted, amalgamated beast pounced directly onto Samantha, pinning her fragile human body against the bed. The weight was crushing, and the proxy's mechanical jaws clamped down right next to her face, a low energy hum priming its weapon systems. James! Samantha gasped, her analytical armor completely shattering as she was pinned down. Inside his pod, James didn't panic. He channeled his fury into absolute arithmetic. He raised Limbo's hand and snapped his fingers with a catastrophic force. Clack! A massive, violent cataclysm bubble erupted, swallowing the entire bedchamber. Instantly, James engaged stasis. The universe ground to a dead stop. Zanuka's glowing ocular sensors frozen mid-blink. The mechanical whirring of its jaw weapons died. The dust motes floating in the air turned into gold specks. Because Samantha was directly synchronized with James, she remained completely unfrozen with the pocket dimension. Move, James commanded, his frame stepping toward to brace against the side of the bed. Samantha didn't waste a single millisecond. Using the absolute stillness of the enemy to her advantage, she twisted her body, slipping cleanly out from beneath Zanuka's heavy frozen paws. She rolled across the sheets and slammed her hand directly into the chest plate of her Mesa frame. Initiating transference. A blinding flash of cyan energy erupted from the frame's eyes. The physical body of Samantha vanished as her consciousness expanded, looking back into the familiar, lethal ballistic matrix of the gunslinger. Mesa rose from the bed, her twin regulators instantly sliding into her hands with a terrifying metallic click. She was no longer defenseless. Mesa stood side by side with Limbo, her visor flashing as her heart rate stabilized into that perfect calming frequency James needed. I'm back, James, Samantha said over her private channel, her voice carrying a ruthless analytical edge. Collapse to stasis. Let's dismantle this thing. After James and Samantha dismantled Zanuka, James had um, told Wendy, wait, Samantha, Wendy, and Reggie that he will pull, he will perform another rift jump out of the gas city and back to the somatic chamber room. All right. Time for the escape plan, guys. The scrap metal of Zanuka clattered across the upland floor, its cybernetic systems completely dark. Samantha spun her regulators back into their holsters with a precise, satisfying click, looking over at Limbo. The threat variable is neutralized, Samantha said, her voice echoing at that perfect 110 hertz frequency that immediately grounded James's mind. But the facility alerts are cascading. We have a 3-minute window for a total lockdown. James didn't look at the doors. He raised Limbo's hands, his brilliant mind already spinning up the non-Euclidean equations that had brought them here. He opened a direct, high-priority neural link to the entire squad. Samantha, Wendy, Reggie, listen to my coordinates, James commanded, his voice carrying a calm, unyielding authority. We are not utilizing the extraction docks. The Corpus fleet had deployed overlapping blockade lines in the upper atmosphere. The survival probability of a standard landing craft extraction is less than 12%. James? Wendy's voice crackled over the comms from her sniper perch. A hint of her old playful energy returning, but tightly controlled. There's a massive wall of Corpus crewmen heading your way. What's the play, math boy? Stand perfectly still, James replied. I am going to perform another localized rift jump. I am pulling all four of our warframes and our physical operator bodies out of the gas city simultaneously, bypassing the entire Jovian sector and dropping us directly back into our somatic chamber room. A brief silence hung over the channel. Reggie's observant mind quickly calculated the sheer magnitude of what James was proposing. To fold space for one or two people was historic. To jump an entire four-man squad across planetary distances from inside an enemy fortress was a feat that should not have been physically possible. No, wait, let me rephrase that, guys. Let me rephrase that. To fold space for one or two people was historic. To jump an entire four-man squad across planetary distances from inside an enemy fortress was a feat that should have not should have been physically impossible. Ugh. The dimensional strain on your neural pathways would be severe, James, Reggie noted, his voice laced with newfound respect. Are your metrics stable? They are absolute, James said, his visor tilting toward Mesa. I have my anchor. Samantha stepped close, her armored hand gripping Limbo's shoulder plates in a predictable, firm touch. We're ready, James. Lock it in. Through the neural link, James synchronized Wisp's solar telemetry and Site 9 spatial markers onto Limbo's master grid. Inside his somatic pod, James closed his eyes, blocking out the distant sound of alarms and the frantic static of the world. He focused entirely on the warmth of Samantha's presence beside him. He rewrote the laws of the material plane in one final time. Limbo snapped his fingers. Crack! A catastrophic flash of golden and radiant white energy consumed Aladvi's bedchamber, the sniper perch, and the maintenance corridor all at once. The space station's sensors violently glitched, registering a massive localized reality tear before dropping back to zero. A split second later, the quiet, dimly lit somatic chamber room aboard the orbiter hissed with a massive displacement of air. Four warframes materialized in a perfect circle on the deck plates, perfectly intact. Instantly, the streams disengaged and the pods opened. James stepped out of his pod, his chest heaving, his body exhausted but his mind entirely clear. Across the room, Samantha stepped out of her own pod without a single word about protocol or the Lotus. She walked straight across the steel floor, past the empty space that had them separated for days, and wrapped her arms tightly around him. James held her back, his fingers finally stopping their nervous twitching as he buried his face into her hair. The static in his head was completely gone. Wendy and Reggie stepped out of their respective pods, watching the two quietly. Wendy smiled, a soft, genuinely happy expression on her face, while Reggie simply gave a single respectful nod. They had defied the Lotus, rewritten the boundaries of the Void, and had proven that their matrix was entirely unbreakable. Let's see what we're doing on time. 18 minutes in. Wendy is worried about the Lotus being angry with James, and Reggie understands that what they just did was a historical feat. Samantha, wait, still locking her arms arms around James, began to sob, saying she don't don't want to be captured ever again. Samantha explains to James that being restrained in and placed in a cold, dark room nearly broke her. James tries to comfort her by saying that if the Lotus were to try to separate, no wait, that makes no sense. Like, I want to like leave Lotus out of this part. Do not make a promise that he couldn't keep, but will try to keep her safe. I'm getting hungry. Probably because I only had a small bowl of oatmeal this morning. The rhythmic, mechanical hum of the somatic chamber felt grounding, but the tension in the room remained thick. Wendy paced back and forth near the main console, her fingers nervously twirling around a strand of her hair. The Lotus is going to be furious, she muttered, her voice tight with anxiety as she glanced at the static-heavy communication logs. We didn't just bend protocol, James. We shattered it. We ignored a direct order and weaponized void metrics she explicitly told us not to bury. Reggie didn't look up from his terminal, but his observant eyes were intensely tracking the ship's defensive grid. Let her be angry, he said, his flat tone carrying a rare, profound weight. What James just executed was a historical anomaly, pulling a four-man group across planetary sectors seamlessly through a non-Euclidean rift. I don't know why is it saying it like that now all of a sudden? It's weird. It invalidates every standard limitation recorded ever since the old war. We we aren't just an elite combat unit anymore. We are a tactical variable she can no longer predict. In the center of the room, Samantha paid absolutely no attention to the strategic data. She kept her arms fiercely locked around James's neck, her body trembling with small, violent hitches. The analytical armor she usually wore to protect herself was completely gone. She began to sob openly, her tears soaking into his tunic as she held him tightly, terrified that letting go would make him vanish. I don't want to go back out there, James, Samantha choked out, her voice breaking into a ragged, desperate whisper. I don't ever want to be captured again. Please. James stood rigid, his acute senses processing the sudden, frantic warmth of her grip. He didn't try to pull away. He focused entirely on the 110 hertz vibration of her voice, letting it slow down the frantic racing of his own high IQ mind. The isolation, Samantha sobbed, burying her face deeper into his shoulder. When they stripped Mesa away, when they locked me in that cold, dark room, the silence wasn't like your rift, James. Your rift makes sense. It has geometry, but that dark cell, it had nothing. The sensory deprivation nearly broke my mind. Every second I was in there, I felt my analytical data fracturing. If you hadn't broken through that door, James lifted his hands, his movements careful, deliberate, and entirely predictable so he wouldn't startle her. He placed his large palms flat against her back, anchoring her against his chest. His fingers stopped their frantic, anxious twitching as he squeezed her tightly. "Samantha," James said softly, his voice dropping its mechanical cadence, filled instead with a fierce, quiet intensity. "I cannot make an absolute mathematical promise that I cannot keep. The origin system contains too many chaotic variables. I cannot guarantee that Elad V or the Grenier would ever attempt another tactical ambush." He pulled back just enough to look directly into her tear-streaked eyes, his focus entirely locked onto hers. "But I can tell you this," James whispered, his hand rising to gently trace the pulse fluttering at the base of her throat. "I have solved the non-Euclidean jump equations. The nullifiers cannot hold me back anymore. No matter what dark room they put you in, no matter what planetary sector they hide you behind, I will find the frequency. I will bend space until there is zero distance between us. I will try to keep you safe, Samantha. Always." Samantha looked at him, her breathing slowly sinking with his steady chest movements. The cold, suffocating memory of the Jovian prison cell finally began to dissolve, replaced by the unbreakable mathematical absolute of the man standing right before her. As the four operators were beginning to settle down, oop, I gotta put a comma there. Wendy states that the Lotus, let's see, may have deliberately sabotaged James' progress with Limbo while paired up with Samantha. And Reggie points out that, wait, Reggie, oh, wrong button, thinks that the reason why the I always got to put a capital L on there did this is because she's afraid of James and his Limbo. Alright, guys, just the somatic chamber was dead quiet, save for the hum of the cooling vents. The heavy emotional weight of the rescue was finally settling, but the strategic reality of what they'd just done was about to crash down around them. Wendy stopped her pacing, her eyes flashing with a sudden sharp clarity that she rarely showed. She looked over at James and Samantha, who were still standing close together by the console. "Guys, we need to look at the bigger picture here," Wendy said, her voice dropping all of its usual playful bounce. "Think about what happened back there, James. You solved a dimensional equation that was supposed to be impossible. You did something that the original Limbo died trying to do. And you, and when you, and when you, and when you, when did you, oh, damn it. Sorry guys, I'm tongue-tied here. And when did you make that breakthrough? You made it because you were trying to save Samantha. The Lotus didn't separate you two because you were unstable. She deliberately sabotaged your progress, James. She saw how fast your mastery over the Rift Plane was expanding when you were paired with Samantha, and she used your autism as an excuse to break your routine and force a cognitive crash." Reggie leaned his back against the cold steel bulkhead, crossing his arms. His highly observant eyes didn't track the data screens this time. They were locked onto James. Wendy is correct, Reggie stated, his voice flat, carried the chilling weight of pure, unfiltered logic. The Lotus is the mother of the Tenno, but she is also a master tactician who operates on an extreme need for systemic control. She keeps us on a strict leash. She tells us which sectors to strike, which targets to liquidate, and how to use our frames. But a limbo operator who can seamlessly cross planetary distances, circumvent nullifier grids, and pull an entire squad through the fold without a landing craft, that just isn't an elite soldier anymore. Reggie stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. She's afraid of you, James. She's afraid of what your limbo can do. If you can rewrite the laws of physics and teleport at will, you don't need her navigation grids. You don't need her mission parameters. You become completely autonomous. She separated you from Samantha because she knew Samantha's 110 hertz frequency was your only thing anchoring your brain. She wanted to keep you weak, isolated, and entirely dependent on her command structure. Samantha turned her head, her hands still clutching James's sleeve as Reggie's words sank in. Her analytical mind instantly cross-referenced the timeline. The Lotus hasn't been punishing her for falling in love. She had been treating them like an unpredictable threat that needed to be dismantled. James stood perfectly still, his high IQ mind absorbing the tactical assessment. The realization didn't cause a panic or a sensory overload this time. The static in his head was completely gone, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp formula. They were no longer just operators hiding from the chaos of the universe. They were rebels. As the four operators were talking, the Lotus hijacked their comms. Lotus wasn't just angry that James defied her direct orders. She realized that she inexplicably made James, as a limbo operator, stronger by separating them. The Lotus finally confesses that she separated them because she was afraid of James. She watched in disbelief that a limbo operator could do the impossible. James stepped in front of the projector saying Limbo had an anchor. He saying that Limbo never had an anchor. He died because he was too confident in his math. That he died because he wasn't cautious in his mathematical formulas. The Lotus breaks down and apologizes to James and Samantha for ever separating them. James stepped closer to the Lotus's projection and says, I forgive you. He used his high IQ to justify the reason behind Lotus's logic, and saw that this experience has made him, Samantha, Wendy, and Reggie stronger as a unit. James explained to Lotus that pairing him with a girl with a playful personality nearly broke him, but with reason, he changed her behavior and made her a better Wisp. Samantha stepped forward, stating her partner, Reggie, who was only focused on completing missions, and said that Reggie, as a person, was forced to change because of his lack of care to his squad mates. The static on the secondary tactical display didn't just flicker, it tore open. The purple silhouette of the Lotus materialized directly in the center of the somatic chamber, overriding the orbiter's defense matrix entirely. Her image pulsed with a harsh, uncharacteristic instability. She wasn't just angry that James had openly defied her direct orders. Her tactical processors were reeling as she looked at the four gathered Tenno. She realized her cold math had suffered a catastrophic calculational error. By attempting to tear James and Samantha apart to suppress an uncontrollable variable, she had inexplicably forced them to evolve, making James stronger than any limbo operator in recorded history. James, Samantha. The Lotus's voice echoed through the chamber, the serene, unyielding tone she had always maintained finally splintering. A profound vulnerability cracked through her voice as she made a staggering confession. I separated you because I was afraid. I watched in absolute disbelief as a limbo operator accomplished the mathematically impossible. I let my fear of the void dictate my command structure. I sought to control what I could not predict. James took three measured, rhythmic steps forward, stopping directly in front of the flickering projector. He stood tall, his high IQ gaze steady, completely stripped of the grief that had weighed on him for days. Limbo never had an anchor, Lotus, James stated, his voice flat, clear, and perfectly precise. The archives are misinterpreted. He did not die because he lacked an emotional tether. He died because he was too confident in his math. He was reckless in his higher dimensional formulas. He assumed his equations were absolute constants, neglecting the fluid variables of the void. I did not survive the planetary jump because Samantha anchored me. I survived because I was cautious where he was arrogant. I factored the instability into the proof. The Lotus's projection bowed her head. Her shoulders visibly dropping as the absolute truth of his words shattered her remaining tactical justifications. She broke down over the transmission, her voice thick with genuine remorse. I miscalculated your mind, James. I allowed my directive to protect the origin system to weaponize your nature against you. I am deeply sorry. I apologize to you, for both of you, for ever separating you. James stepped a fraction closer to the glowing light, his fingers entirely still against his side. The static in his head was completely gone, replaced by a massive, overarching logic model. I forgive you, Lotus, James said calmly. Using his genius level intellect, he didn't view her betrayal as a malicious strike, but as a flawed algorithmic response to fear. Your logic was defensive, though highly inefficient, but the equation has yielded a superior result. This experience did not break us. It has made me, Samantha, Wendy, and Reggie vastly stronger as a unified combat matrix. He turned his head slightly over towards Wendy, who stood quietly by the console. Pairing me with a girl of such a fluid, playful personality nearly short-circuited my cognitive routine. The noise was agonizing, but through deliberate reason and structured boundaries, her behavior shifted. She learned the gravity of the sector. The Matrix forced her to adapt. It made her a significantly better Wisp. Samantha stepped forward, her hand moving to rest firmly and predictably on James's arm, her presence perfectly reinforcing his words. Her analytical eyes locked onto the Lotus. And look at Reggie, Samantha added, her voice matching the steady, grounding frequency James always relied on. When we were paired, he was a man who focused entirely on mission progress, completely blind to the safety or survival of his squad mates. But the sheer brutality of this separation forced him to change. He was forced to realize that an unfeeling soldier is a predictable liability. He learned to care for his team because our survival depends on it. The four the four operators stood side by side in the quiet room, a perfect self-made syndicate. They had bypassed the nullifiers, conquered the planetary void, and fixed the flaws in each other's algorithms. The Lotus stared at the ranks they formed, realizing she no longer commanded tools. She was looking at the future of the Tenno. Let's see what we're doing on time. Oh, 6 minutes in. Ah, probably could have added this section in the last video, but eh. The Lotus stood in front of the four operators. Let's see. And oh crap, I'm hitting writer's block over here. And quietly congratulated them. No wait. No wait. Oh, actually, you know what? Lotus ended her trip. The Lotus nodded her head. And let's see. And cut the comms. As Lotus was pacing in her chamber, she muttered to herself, my children are growing up with a smile on her face. The Lotus nodded her head slowly, her holographic figure stabilizing into a warm, gentle light. The tactical alerts on a console faded away with a soft chime. She cut the comms channel. Back in her grand inner sanctuary, the mother of the Tenno stepped down from her high platform. She began to pace slowly across the smooth stone floor, the heavy silk of her robes rustling in a quiet air. The fear that had gripped her processors for days was entirely gone, replaced by a profound, enduring peace. A rare, beautiful smile broke across her face as she looked toward the stars. My children are growing up, she muttered softly to herself. She realized that James, Samantha, Reggie, and Wendy didn't need a strict, rigid cage to keep them safe anymore. They had outgrown her fears. They had found their own balance, rewritten the rules of the void, and discovered that their greatest strength wasn't their warframes. It was each other. A few hours later, the quiet rhythm of the orbiter finally returned to absolute normalcy. James sat at his primary console, his fingers resting still and relaxed against the desk. The frantic, anxious twitching was completely gone. The static in his head had vanished, replaced by a deep, comforting quiet. A sleek, metallic flask was lowered gently right next to his hand. James looked up. Samantha stood beside him, her sharp, analytical eyes filled with the soft, unyielding warmth. She didn't have to say a word. James picked up the flask, his fingers brushing against hers for a long, lingering moment. He took a sip. It was exactly 62 degrees Celsius. Perfect. Across the room, Wendy was sitting cross-legged on a storage crate, quietly checking the energy diagnostics on her wisp frame with a serious, focused expression. Beside her, Reggie stood rigid, carefully polishing the barrel of his Sight 9 sniper rifle. He looked over at Wendy, offering a rare, subtle nod of approval as she finalized the data check. The Matrix is at 100% efficiency, James, Samantha said softly, her voice hitting that perfect, steady 110 hertz frequency that always anchored his soul. James sat his tea down, reaching out to lock his fingers securely into hers. He looked out the viewing port of the vast, infinite stars of the Origin system, ready for whatever equation the universe threw at them next. Yes, James whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. The mathematics are finally complete. This concludes the story of James, Samantha, Wendy, and Reggie. This I hope you guys enjoyed this story, and thank you guys for watching and listening. And have a good day, everybody.